The most influential people you have ever met did not talk the most. They talked the least, and every word landed like a stone. That is the paradox. Most people speak to release pressure. They pour out thoughts, fill empty space, explain too much, promise too much, repeat too much, and by the time they finish, nothing in what they said still has weight. They overspeak and underdeliver. You have seen it in rooms that matter. The loud voice gets attention for a moment. The measured voice gets remembered for years. The truth is, power does not rush to explain itself. It chooses. It leaves space. By the end of this, you will never waste words the same way again. Chapter 1. The Cost of a Loose Tongue. You already know the feeling. The moment after you said too much. The room goes quiet, but not in the way you wanted. Something inside you starts replaying every sentence, every extra explanation, every nervous detail you threw into the air, trying to be understood, trying to be liked, trying to control how you were seen, and now all you feel is exposed. A careless mouth drains authority faster than failure. People think weakness looks like fear. Sometimes it does, but more often weakness sounds like over-explaining. It sounds like talking past the point. It sounds like trying to force clarity with volume. It sounds like a person who does not trust silence, because silence feels like a loss of control. That is where the leak begins. You do not lose power only when you lie. You lose power when you say what did not need to be said. You lose power when your mouth moves faster than your mind. You lose power when every thought demands an audience. Most people never notice this because modern life rewards noise at first. Fast replies, constant updates, opinions on everything, endless commentary. The person who always has something to say appears engaged, informed, and present. But the appearance fades quickly. Over time, people start to feel the pattern. They hear the waste. They stop treating your words like signals and start treating them like background. That is a brutal shift. Stop for a second. Think about your own life. How often do you speak just to soften tension? A loose tongue is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle. It shows up in small confessions you did not need to make, in long texts that explain your feelings to people who have already made their choice, in meetings where you answer a question, then keep going because the silence after your answer makes you uneasy, in arguments where the first sentence was strong, but the next 10 sentences buried it. This is where most people stop. They think the problem is bad communication. It is not. The deeper problem is emotional dependence on expression. You think saying more will rescue you from uncertainty. You think that if you explain your reasons clearly enough, people will finally see your value. You think that if you keep talking, you can prevent rejection, reduce conflict, hold attention, and protect your image. But words used that way do not create power. They reveal hunger, and hunger talks too much. The truth is, people trust restraint more than intensity. Restraint tells them there is a mind behind the mouth. It tells them your speech is chosen, not spilled. It tells them you are not trying to control the room through pressure. You are controlling yourself first. That is rare. And rare things carry weight. Look closely at people who command respect without chasing it. Their language is clean. Their answers are sharp. Their pauses are not empty. They do not fill every silence because they are not afraid of what silence might expose. They let a point stand. They let a question breathe. They let other people reveal themselves. That last part matters. When you talk too much, you do not just weaken your own position, you also rob yourself of information. Silence makes other people talk, and when people talk, they show you their motives, fears, insecurities, loyalties, and limits. The person who cannot stop speaking never gathers this. He is too busy broadcasting. Pause here. This matters more than you think. Talking can feel like control. Listening is where control is built. A lot of your suffering has been made worse by your own mouth. Not because you are foolish, not because you are weak beyond repair, but because you were never taught that speech is a form of spending. Every sentence costs something. It can be a mystery, it can cost leverage, it can cost dignity, it can cost peace. And if you keep spending words carelessly, you wake up one day unable to understand why people hear you less, value you less, and trust you less. The answer is simple. You taught them your words were cheap. Cheap words come fast. They come in floods. They come dressed as honesty, passion, openness, and confidence. But most of the time, they are anxious and speak in a louder voice. This is where most people stop. They blame personality. They say that is just how I am. I am expressive. I speak my mind. I keep it real. But that line hides a deeper refusal. You do not want to face the discipline that precision requires. You do not want to admit that real control means swallowing the sentence that wants to escape. Because that swallow burns. It burns when you want to defend yourself. It burns when you want the last word. It burns when you want immediate relief from misunderstanding. It burns when someone underestimates you and you want to unload your entire case right there. But that burn is not lost. That burn is training. And training changes identity. The truth is, every powerful speaker is first a ruthless editor of self. Before the sentence reaches the world, it passes through judgment. Does this need to be said? Does it need to be said now? Does it need to be said by me? If the answer is no, the words die in silence, and silence keeps the strength. That is not repression. That is a command. Your mouth has been moving as it works for your feelings. It has been taking orders from pressure, pride, fear, and impulse. That is why you leave conversations feeling weaker than when you entered them. You may have gained temporary relief, but you lost position. Read that again in your mind. Temporary relief, lost position. The people who shape rooms, shape outcomes, and shape memory do not rush to spend themselves. They understand that speech should leave an impact, not a residue. They know that when every sentence matters, people lean in. And when people lean in, your words stop being noise and start becoming a force. You do not need to say more. You need less waste. And once you see how much of your life has been drained by unnecessary speech, you start noticing the deeper reason you keep reaching for it. Because the mouth is rarely the real problem. The real problem is what you have been trying to escape every time you refuse to let silence stand. Chapter 2. Why silence feels like danger. Silence feels simple from the outside. Just do not speak. Just pause. Just hold your tongue. But if it were that easy, you would have mastered it years ago. The reason you have not is that silence does not feel neutral to an undisciplined mind. It feels dangerous. It feels like exposure. The moment words stop, you meet something raw. You meet uncertainty without padding. You meet the possibility that nothing will rescue you. No charm, no explanation, no quick defense, no flood of language to steer the moment back in your favor. Just stillness and whatever truth is sitting inside it. That is what most people cannot tolerate. Silence presses on the nervous system by removing the usual escape routes. When you are with another person and the room goes quiet, your mind starts racing. Did I say something wrong? Do they disapprove? Do I look weak? Should I explain? Should I joke? Should I fix this? Your body treats the pause like a threat, even when no threat exists. So you talk. Not because you have something important to say, because you want relief. That is the hidden engine behind most useless speech. Relief seeking. A lot of people think they speak with confidence. Watch them closely. The second a pause appears, they rush to fill it. That is not confidence. Confidence can wait. Confidence can hold eye contact and let the room breathe. Confidence does not panic when nothing is being said. It understands that silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is pressure doing its work. Stop here. Be honest with yourself. How many words in your life have been medicine for your discomfort? This goes deeper than conversation. It touches identity. Many people build their sense of self through constant verbal proof. They explain their values, motives, plans, pain, standards, insight, loyalty, and ambition. They keep speaking because they are afraid that if they stop, nobody will see who they are. But the truth is, if identity must be constantly explained, it is not settled. Settled people speak with less strain. They do not need every room to validate them. They do not need every silence to confirm them. They do not need every misunderstanding corrected in real time. Their center is not hanging by a sentence. This is where most people stop. They hear that and assume silence means passivity. It does not. Silence is not withdrawal when it comes from control. Silence is not weakness when it is chosen. Silence is a test. It tests whether you can remain intact without reaching for immediate reassurance. Most cannot. That is why they confess too quickly. Why do they answer questions nobody asked? Why do they explain motives to people who do not care? Why do they negotiate against themselves before anyone applies pressure? Their mouths race ahead because silence is making them feel the instability they spend all day hiding. This is why strategic word economy is not just a speaking skill. It is a nervous system skill. It is a discipline of containment. Can you feel heat without reacting? Can you let the misunderstanding sit for a moment? Can you resist the urge to rescue your image? Can you tolerate not being instantly understood? Those questions separate power from performance. This is not small. Your whole life changes when you stop treating discomfort like an emergency. Think about conflict. The person who rushes to answer every accusation usually exposes more than the accuser knew. The person who can listen, breathe, and answer only what matters forces the other side to show their hand. Or think about attraction. The person who needs constant talking usually feels a need. The person who can remain calm in silence creates gravity. Or think about leadership. The leader who talks through every thought sounds uncertain. The leader who speaks after considering sounds grounded. Silence reveals structure. If you cannot stand still without filling space, your inner life is unstable. That is not an insult. It is a diagnosis. And diagnosis is where repair begins. The truth is, you have probably mistaken speed for strength. Quick replies, fast explanations, immediate reactions. But speed often comes from fear of sitting with the unknown. Real strength is slower. It does not mean delayed forever. It means deliberate. It means you choose your words after pressure arrives, not before. That alone would change how people hear you, not because silence is magic, because silence increases contrast. When words are constant, nothing stands out. When words are rare and exact, each one lands with force. Just like darkness makes a light brighter, silence makes language sharper. This is why some people can say one sentence and alter the entire room. The sentence itself may be simple. What gave it weight was everything they refused to say before it. The pause prepared the ground. The restraint gathered force. The silence made the words hit. That kind of impact cannot be faked with vocabulary. It comes from control. and control always feels uncomfortable before it feels natural. You may hear all this and think, fine, I should just talk less. That is not enough. Many people talk less but remain weak because their silence is full of fear. They are not choosing stillness, they are freezing. That is a different thing. Chosen silence is active. It listens, it observes, it measures, it waits without shrinking. That is the skill. You are not trying to become quiet because quiet sounds wise. You are learning to become stable enough that silence no longer threatens your sense of self. Once that happens, you stop speaking for relief and start speaking for effect. You stop using language to manage your feelings and start using it to carry truth. And when that shift begins, another uglier pattern comes into view. You start to see how often people use words not to communicate, but to hide, because the mouth does not only expose weakness, sometimes it protects it. Chapter 3: Words as a hiding place. Most people do not use words to reveal themselves. They use words to avoid themselves. That is the harder truth. Use can sound honest while doing the exact opposite of honesty. It can create a sense of depth without requiring any direct contact with what lies beneath. A person can talk for an hour about standards, pain, loyalty, purpose, clarity, boundaries, discipline, and truth, and still never touch the one sentence that actually matters. That is because language can become camouflage. You have probably done this, not because you are fake in some theatrical sense, because the mind is clever when it wants protection. It will give you intelligent-sounding explanations instead of clean admissions. It will give you long stories instead of the direct truth. It will give you polished words that let you feel exposed while staying hidden. That is a dangerous habit. The person who hides behind words often looks reflective, but listen carefully. There is too much framing, too much context, too many reasons, too much effort to shape how the truth is received before the truth even arrives. It is not clear. It is controlled through fog. Stop for a second. How often do you explain instead of admitting? How often do you describe the edges without ever touching the center? This is where most people stop. They think dishonesty only means saying what is false, but half the dishonesty in adult life comes from saying what is technically true, in a way that protects your ego from the full weight of reality. You did not lie, you just buried the truth under commentary. That burying starts early. As children, many people learn that telling the truth directly carries a risk. It may bring punishment, it may bring rejection, it may bring shame. So the mind develops a shield. It learns to soften facts, decorate motives, create narratives, and speak in ways that preserve image. Over time, this becomes automatic. You start doing it with everyone, then with yourself. And once you start doing it with yourself, you are in trouble. Because self-deception rarely sounds dramatic. It sounds reasonable. It sounds thoughtful. It sounds nuanced. It sounds like I have just been under a lot of pressure. It sounds like I needed to say that so they would understand. It sounds like I am only talking this much because communication matters. But beneath all of that is a more dangerous sentence. I do not want to face the simple truth. The truth is, the simple truth is usually short. I was afraid. I wanted approval. I was trying to impress them. I did not trust myself. I was hurt and wanted to win. I kept talking because I could feel myself losing ground. Those sentences have power because they are naked. No decoration, no fog, no escape. Can you say things plainly? Or does your mind rush in to protect you with style? People who overtalk often think their issue is a social habit. Sometimes it is, but often the habit is feeding on something deeper. If you speak in long circles, you can avoid the clean cut of direct truth. You can keep the issue moving. You can stay in motion. Motion feels safer than impact. A direct sentence lands. A flood of language disperses. That is why so many conversations never resolve anything. Nobody is saying the real thing. They are managing appearance. They are testing reactions. They are buying time. They are hiding behind extra words because extra words create room to slip away from accountability. This is where most people stop. They say that is just how people talk. No, that is how undisciplined people protect themselves. Disciplined speech does not wander when truth is available. It goes where it needs to go, says what is real, and stops. That kind of speech is rare because it costs ego. It costs the comfort of sounding smart. It costs the pleasure of controlling perception. It costs the illusion that complexity is always depth. Sometimes complexity is just avoidance in better clothes. Look at arguments that never end. Most of them keep going because both people are fighting on the surface. They are debating details, tone, timing, wording, and memory, while the deeper truth sits untouched. One feels unseen. One feels disrespected. One is ashamed. One is afraid of losing control. But instead of saying that, they keep talking around it. More words, more defense, more fog. Nothing changes. The same thing happens in quieter forms, in meetings, in dating, in family life, in friendship, in leadership. In every place where people would rather sound competent than be precise. But precision is what changes outcomes. The truth is, a precise sentence can end a week of confusion. A precise admission can end a year of drift. A precise refusal can close a door that weak language kept open far too long. No, I am not available for that. I do not agree. That crossed a line. I need time before I answer. I was wrong. I am done explaining myself. Those sentences are short because truth does not need padding. When truth is real, it can stand on its own legs. Stop here. Feel the weight of that. How much of your life would be cleaned up if you said the real sentence sooner? The discipline of saying less is not just about reducing noise. It is about removing hiding places. It is about cutting away every extra layer until the sentence carries only what is necessary and true. That process is uncomfortable because it strips your usual defenses. Suddenly, you cannot hide in your own cleverness. You hear yourself clearly. Your language reveals exactly where you are settled and where you are not. That exposure is useful. It teaches you that many of your old speaking habits were not communication. They were self-protection. And once you see that, you also see another trap. Sometimes it is not fear that makes people speak carelessly. Sometimes it is ego. Sometimes they keep talking because they are addicted to the feeling of importance their own voice gives them. Chapter 4. The ego that cannot stop talking. Some people talk too much because they are nervous. Some people talk too much because they are in love with themselves. The result can sound similar. The root is not. Anxious speech asks for relief. Ego-driven speech asks for dominance. It wants to hold the floor, set the pace, shape the story, prove its intelligence, display its taste, signal its status, and leave no room where someone else might matter more. It does not always sound arrogant. Sometimes it sounds helpful, sometimes insightful, sometimes charming. But beneath it is the same appetite. Look at me, hear me, recognize me. That appetite gets louder when the self is fragile. A stable person does not need constant verbal proof of value. An unstable ego does. It reaches for stories, opinions, corrections, and commentary because silence feels like disappearing. If the room is not orbiting the voice starts to feel small. So it expands, it interrupts, it adds, it repeats, it explains what nobody asked it to explain. This is where most people stop. They judge that pattern only in obvious show-offs. But ego is more subtle than that. The ego can hide inside intelligence, inside humor, inside vulnerability, even inside being the person who always offers wisdom. The common thread is not style. The common thread is this: Speech is being used to maintain identity in the eyes of others. That is exhausting. Look at your own habits without mercy. Do you speak to add value or to maintain rank? The ego that cannot stop talking is not really strong. It is terrified of becoming ordinary. That is why it keeps feeding on the room. Every reaction becomes fuel. Every nod feels like proof. Every laugh feels like safety. Every pause feels like a threat. So the person keeps going, even after the point has already landed, because stopping would mean surrendering the charge. But the extra words always weaken the original point. That is the irony. The ego thinks that more speech creates more power. In reality, it leaks power. It shows need. It shows attachment. It shows that the speaker wants the effect too badly. And the moment people sense that need, the weight drops from every sentence. The truth is, authority never looks hungry. Real authority does not force itself into every opening. It does not chase every chance to be seen. It does not need to prove awareness of every issue in the room. It can leave things unsaid because its worth is not built on constant display. That kind of person changes the social field without much effort. Why? Because attention follows restraint. People start wondering what this person thinks because they do not hand it away for free. They start listening harder because there is no flood to tune out. They start assigning weight because scarcity sharpens value. Scarcity is power when it is backed by substance. Without substance, silence is just emptiness. That matters. Because some people hear all this and decide to practice minimalism. They become cold on purpose. They start acting distant, giving short replies, and trying to look mysterious. But their silence still smells like ego, because it is a tactic for image, not an expression of internal order. Forced silence can be just as needy as forced talking. This is where most people stop. They trade one performance for another. Loud performance becomes quiet performance. Different costume, same dependence. The work is deeper. You have to break the emotional reward your ego gets from hearing itself. You have to notice how good it feels to hold the room, how satisfying it feels to have the answer, how tempting it is to add one more story that proves you are perceptive, interesting, wounded, strong, special, and ahead. None of those cravings makes you evil, but if you do not govern them, they make you noisy, and noise always reduces impact. Stop here. Remember someone whose words always mattered. Chances are that person never seemed eager to impress. The disciplined speaker is not anti-expression. The disciplined speaker is anti-waste. That means the ego has to be cut down to size, not destroyed, governed, put in its place. Your voice is a tool, not a throne. Your words are for truth, not constant self-construction. That shift changes how you listen. Once you stop treating conversation like a stage, you start hearing things other people miss. Tone, hesitation, what was avoided, what was repeated, what was answered too fast, what was never actually said. You start seeing how often people reveal themselves in the spaces around their words. That level of attention is impossible if you are busy composing your next performance. And performance is exactly what many people bring to every room. They perform with insight, confidence, and honesty. They provide care. They perform control. But performance cracks under pressure because it depends on constant output. Real control can become quieter as pressure rises. In fact, that is often how you recognize it. The room gets tense. Everyone starts leaking energy through speech. Then one person becomes more measured, not less. That person usually holds the center. The truth is, silence embarrasses the ego. Silence denies it applause. Silence forces it to stand without ornament. That is why learning to say less feels like an insult at first. Your ego thinks it is being erased. It is not. It is being trained to serve something higher than its cravings. That training hurts. Good. It should. Because the version of you that needs constant verbal proof will never carry real gravity. Gravity comes from self-possession, from knowing you do not have to push your presence into the room for it to be felt, from understanding that a sentence gains force when it is chosen, not displayed. And once you stop feeding the ego with endless language, you start meeting another source of waste, not pride this time, fear. Especially the fear that if you do not explain yourself fully, people will define you in ways you cannot control. Chapter 5. The need to explain yourself. Few things drain a person faster than the constant urge to be understood. It sounds innocent, even noble. You just want clarity. You just want fairness. You just want people to know your side. But beneath that urge, there is often a hidden dependence. You need other people to confirm that your inner reality is valid. And when they do not, you start explaining. Then you keep explaining. And somewhere in that flood, your dignity starts slipping through your own mouth. The need to explain yourself is one of the clearest signs that your center is living outside you. If your peace depends on everyone correctly understanding your intent, you will never have peace. People project, they simplify, they misread, they reduce, they compare. They hear through their own wounds and agendas. That is human. If you try to control all of that with enough words, you will become a servant to misunderstanding. That is no way to live. Stop for a second. How many of your long conversations were really requests for permission to feel okay? This is where most people stop. They assume that more explanation leads to greater justice. Sometimes it does. Facts matter, clarity matters, context matters, but there is a line, and most people cross it because they cannot tolerate being seen imperfectly. So they keep adding detail, hoping the next sentence will finally produce the exact image they want in someone else's mind. It almost never works. Why? Because the person listening has already decided more than you think. Once people have formed a lens, too much explanation often confirms the weakness rather than correcting perception. Not because the explanation is weak in itself, because excess explanation signals emotional dependence on the outcome, and dependence has a sound. It sounds breathless, repetitive. It sounds over-careful and overloaded. It sounds like someone asking, "Please do not leave me with your wrong idea of me." That sound costs you. The truth is, you do not need universal understanding to remain whole. You need internal alignment. If what you said was true, if what you did was clean, if what you chose was deliberate, then sometimes the strongest move is to let misunderstanding stand until action, time, or consequence sorts it out. That takes nerve. It takes nerve to leave a conversation before your ego feels complete. It takes nerve to answer briefly when you want to make a full case. It takes nerve to say, "I have said what I need to say," and stop there. Most people do not have that nerve. Think about your last conflict. At what point did truth end and self-protection begin? The person who cannot stop explaining is often trying to outrun shame. Shame says, "If they see me wrongly, I become wrong." So the mouth works overtime to restore identity, but that effort hands away too much power. Now, other people become judges of your internal stability. Now your words are not carrying truth. They are begging for correction. This is where most people stop. They defend their habit by calling it communication. No, communication ends when the needed point has been made. What comes after that is often compulsion, and compulsion always gets expensive. You see it in relationships. One person says too much, trying to prove love, loyalty, pain, effort, and sincerity. The other person listens less with every paragraph, not because the feelings are fake, because intensity without economy becomes hard to trust. If every emotion arrives in a speech, none of it feels grounded. You see it at work. A simple answer would do, but the person adds reasons, background, and justification that nobody asked for. The room starts to feel insecure, even if the content is valid. You see it in a family. Old roles wake up. You become 12 years old again. Suddenly, you are arguing for your right to be seen correctly. Old pain takes the microphone. You see it online. Endless statements, clarifications, defenses. People are trying to manage perception with volume. It never ends because the underlying need is endless. The truth is, there is freedom in being willing to be misunderstood by those committed to misunderstanding you. That sentence can save years of wasted energy. Not everyone deserves your full case. Not every accusation deserves your full answer. Not every distorted view deserves immediate correction. Some things deserve one sentence, deserve silence. Some deserve departure. Stop here. Feel how hard that is. Then feel how clean it is. This does not mean you become careless or vague. It means you stop explaining past the point of value. You stop giving 10 sentences where 2 would hold. You stop trying to extract closure from people who profit from your confusion. You stop performing your soul in front of people who came only to judge your posture. That discipline changes your nervous system. You start noticing the first wave of panic that says, say more, fix this, and instead of obeying, you stay. You let the pressure rise without spending yourself. You trust that your worth does not collapse because somebody left with an incomplete story. That is maturity. That is control. That is power returning to the hands that should have had it all along. And when you stop burning energy on unnecessary explanation, something surprising happens. Speech becomes available for a different purpose. No longer for rescue, no longer for ego, no longer for self-defense on an endless loop. It becomes available for precision, for timing, for choice, for impact. That is where the turn begins, because once waste is cut, discipline can finally enter the mouth. Chapter 6. Discipline at the edge of the tongue. Now the real work starts. Not the idea of saying less, the practice. This is the part people romanticize until they try it. They imagine becoming composed overnight. They imagine a calmer voice, cleaner speech, stronger presence. But when discipline reaches the edge of the tongue, it stops being poetic and starts becoming physical. You feel it in the jaw, in the chest, in the throat, in the pulse that rises when a sentence wants out, and you refuse it. That refusal is where power is built. Discipline in speech is not mainly about what happens after you think. It is about what happens in the half-second before expression. That small gap contains more of your character than most long conversations. In that gap, impulse asks for release, habit asks for speed, ego asks for display, fear asks for reassurance, and discipline answers with one word: wait. Most people never learn to wait within themselves, so they talk as soon as they feel. That is why their words carry the shape of their moods. Angry words, needy words, defensive words, proud words, wounded words, not chosen words. If language always reports your first internal weather, it cannot carry much authority. Authority comes when speech is filtered through judgment. Think about the last sentence you wish you could take back. It was probably not evil. It was probably ungoverned. This is where most people stop. They try to discipline speech at the level of content. They make rules. Do not say this, say that instead. Those rules can help, but they do not reach the root. The root is pace. If you do not slow the passage between feeling and expression, old habits will keep slipping through new language. So the first practice is simple. Delay. Delay your answer by 1 breath. Delay your reaction by 3 seconds. Delay your opinion until the full question is clear. Delay your defense until the emotional heat has cooled enough for the truth to speak without panic. That delay may sound small. It is not. Small delays change verbal destiny. The truth is, most damage in speech happens fast. It happens before thought catches up. A sarcastic line, an extra confession, a defensive explanation, an unnecessary promise, an impulsive message sent to relieve tension. You do not need to become silent forever. You need to create space where choice can enter. Choice is everything. Without choice, your mouth is just a servant of momentum. With choice, speech becomes a tool. Can you feel the difference between releasing words and selecting them? A disciplined speaker pays attention to function. What is this sentence doing? Is it clarifying? Is it correct? Is it setting a limit? Is it carrying truth? Is it opening insight? Or is it only releasing pressure? If the function is weak, the sentence is weak, no matter how polished it sounds. This is where most people stop. They want better phrasing before they earn better control. But phrasing without control is decoration. It may impress for a minute. It will not hold under pressure. The disciplined person works more deeply. He trains the pause, he trains the cut, he trains the ability to let an incomplete impulse die before it becomes public. That is a private form of strength nobody claps for, which is why so few build it. You can begin in ordinary places. When someone asks a question, answer the question and stop. When you disagree, state the disagreement without building a courtroom around it. When you feel misunderstood, correct only what matters. When you feel the urge to prove something, say nothing until the urge passes. Then see if the sentence is still needed. Often it is not. That is an important discovery. Many sentences feel necessary only while emotion is hot. Once the heat passes, the sentence loses urgency. That alone should teach you something about how much of your old speech was never the truth. It was hot, looking for an exit. The truth is, not every honest thought deserves expression. This confuses people because they worship authenticity without discipline. They think real means immediate. It does not. A thought can be real and still unfit for release. A feeling can be valid and still not deserve a microphone. Discipline decides what truth becomes action and what truth gets processed in silence. That is the maturity of speech. This is sharp but necessary. You are not obligated to announce every inner movement. Once you accept that, you become more dangerous in the best sense. Not dangerous through aggression, dangerous through clarity. People can no longer pull you into pointless speech so easily. Bait loses force, pressure loses speed, manipulation loses entry points. Why? Because your mouth is no longer an open gate. It has a guard now. That guard is a choice, and choice creates presence. Not the loud kind, the kind people feel before they can explain it. They sense that your words are passing through control. They sense you are not trying to dominate the room or escape it. You are standing in it, steady, measuring, saying only what carries weight. That is when silence changes meaning. It stops being an absence. It becomes part of the message. Your pauses start to signal confidence instead of fear. Your restraint begins to create anticipation rather than confusion. Your sentences start to arrive like decisions, not accidents. This is where most people stop. They learn the technique, but not the standard. They use shorter speech, but still speak carelessly. That is not enough. The standard is not fewer words alone. The standard is cleaner words, words that do a job, words that leave no residue, words that match action, because if speech is not aligned with action, it still loses weight. And that takes you to the next cut, the one almost nobody wants to make. It is easy to reduce words in moments of calm. The real test is whether your language remains disciplined when emotion, conflict, and pride come looking for the microphone. Chapter 7. Control under pressure. Anybody can sound measured when nothing is at stake. That proves almost nothing. The test comes when you are provoked, when you are accused unfairly, when someone challenges your competence, when a partner hits an old wound, when a friend disappoints you. when a room turns cold, when you want to correct, defend, expose, punish, or win. That is where language becomes a battlefield, and that is where your discipline is either real or decorative. Pressure tells the truth about your mouth. If you only know how to speak with control in easy moments, then control does not yet belong to you. It belongs to conditions, and conditions can turn on you in a second. This is why emotional control and verbal control cannot be separated. The mouth follows the state. If the state is flooded, speech floods. If the state is stable, speech stabilizes. So when pressure rises, your first job is not to craft the perfect line. Your first job is to keep your inner ground. That means slowing the body, breathing lower, letting the first wave pass. Not because calm is always graceful, because clarity dies in reaction. Stop for a second. Think about the damage done by one heated sentence. Then think about the strength required to leave that sentence unsaid. This is where most people stop. They think self-control means suppressing emotion. No. Control means refusing to let emotion run the mouth. You can feel anger fully and still speak with precision. You can feel hurt fully and still choose restraint. You can feel urgency fully and still wait long enough for your words to become useful. That is power. Power is not having no fire. Power is deciding where the fire goes. Look at the conflict between disciplined and undisciplined people. The undisciplined person talks faster as pressure rises. More volume, more detail, more accusations, more history, more leakage. The disciplined person often does the opposite. He slows down. He reduces. He answers only what matters. He does not reward chaos with more chaos. He makes the other person work harder for every inch. That changes the whole field, because pressure loves momentum. It wants you moving before you can think. It wants quick replies and emotional spending. The moment you slow the pace, you interrupt that machine. You create space. You regain position. The truth is, many arguments are lost, not because your point was wrong, but because your mouth became undisciplined before your point could stand. You brought too much. You said the sharp thing that poisoned the real thing. You kept talking after the moment was already won. You gave away control because you wanted the emotional reward of more. More almost always makes it worse. Remember that. More anger, worse. More defense, worse. More explanation, worse. More punishment, worse. A precise line under pressure can cut deeper than a speech. I heard you. I disagree. That is not acceptable. I will answer when I am calm. We are done for now. Those lines hold because they are not trying to do everything at once. They define position. They keep their dignity. They refuse escalation. This is where most people stop. They still want the last word. That craving ruins discipline. The need for the last word is rarely about truth. It is about the ego needing a final hit of control. But the last word often makes you smaller. Silence after a clean sentence is usually stronger than the extra line you almost said. That is hard to accept when pride is hot. But pride is a terrible speechwriter. The disciplined person knows when to end. That is part of the meaning more. End before the point gets diluted. End before the pain starts freelancing. End before the need to wound takes over. End before language turns into revenge, because revenge speech always leaves poison in the speaker. The truth is, a person who can remain measured under pressure becomes difficult to manipulate. Guilt tactics lose force. Provocations lose speed. Cheap shots lose access. Why? Because manipulators rely on pulling you into reactive speech. Once reactive speech begins, you can be redirected, misquoted, baited, exhausted, and turned against your own interests. Controlled speech shuts that door. This matters if you want any peace at all. Not every fight is won by talking better. Some are won by refusing the wrong tempo. That refusal is an act of self-respect. It says my mouth will not become a weapon against my own future. My emotions may be loud, but my standards are louder. My impulse may want release, but release is not the same as strength. And with practice, something strange happens. Pressure stops feeling like a command. It starts feeling like a test you know how to pass. You feel the old urge to overflow, and still you remain intact. Not numb, not passive, intact. That feeling builds confidence of a deeper kind. No confidence in your charm, confidence in your command. This is where most people stop. They think command is about controlling others. Real command begins with controlling the point of exit between inner chaos and outer consequence. Your tongue is one of the most dangerous exits you have. Train it, and life gets cleaner. Leave it wild, and every tense moment becomes another chance to weaken your own name. By now, you can feel the shape of the change. Less waste, more delay, more choice, more control under pressure. But there is another layer still waiting. Once your speech is disciplined, it can finally do what careless speech never could. It can become precise enough to cut through confusion and leave truth standing alone. Chapter 8. Precision is a form of power. When words are few and clean, they stop wandering. They start cutting. That is precision. Precision is not about sounding cold or mechanical. It is about removing everything that weakens the signal. Extra adjectives, extra defense, extra framing, extra apology, extra threat, extra performance. What remains is a sentence that knows where it is going and arrives there without shaking. Most people do not realize how rare that is. They speak in clouds. They circle the point. They soften what should be firm and overstate what should be simple. They use 20 words to avoid the weight of 5. Then they wonder why nobody changes, why nothing lands, and why the room keeps misunderstanding them. The reason is brutal. The message never arrived intact. A blurred sentence cannot carry much force. A precise sentence can change a relationship, a boundary, a decision, or a memory. Stop for a second. Think of the strongest line anyone ever said to you. It was probably short. The truth is, the mind remembers clean edges, not floods, not clutter, not paragraphs built from panic. It remembers what was exact. That is why precision creates power. It leaves less to argue with and less to escape from. A precise sentence puts truth close enough to feel, I do not trust that. This will cost more than you think. You are avoiding the real issue. That is not love. I have outgrown this. Those lines stay because they contain no waste. They do not beg. They do not decorate. They do not ask for permission to exist. This is where most people stop. They confuse precision with harshness. Precision can be gentle. Precision can be kind. Precision can be calm. What makes it powerful is not aggression. It is a clean intent. A precise apology is stronger than a dramatic apology. A precise boundary is stronger than an angry boundary. A precise refusal is stronger than a long emotional refusal. Why? Because precision shows that thought has done its work. It shows self-respect. It shows that the sentence is carrying truth, not turbulence. Ask yourself this: do your words usually reveal clarity or your current weather? Precision also depends on timing. A good sentence at the wrong moment loses force. A strong truth delivered too early meets defense. The same truth delivered after silence, after observation, after the room has shown itself, can land like a verdict. This is why saying less and meaning more is not only about reducing language, it is about knowing when the sentence should enter. Timing turns speech into leverage. Undisciplined people waste their leverage by speaking at the first opening. Disciplined people often wait until the sentence has the highest chance of impact. They do not speak just because they can. They speak when the words will do the most work. That is a strategy. And strategy does not rush. This is where most people stop. They want authenticity without patience. They want to say what they feel the moment they feel it and call that honesty. But honesty without timing can become self-sabotage. Precision asks harder questions. Is this true? Is this necessary? Is this the right moment? Is this the strongest form? Those questions turn speech from habit into craft. Craft matters because language shapes consequences. It shapes contracts, shapes endings, shapes trust. It shapes leadership, shapes what people remember when you leave the room. You may never control every outcome, but precision increases your influence on nearly all of them, not through manipulation, through order, through saying the thing that carries the most truth with the least waste. The truth is, every extra word creates risk. Risk of dilution, risk of contradiction, risk of emotional leakage, risk of sounding unsure, risk of giving weak listeners somewhere to hide from your point. Precision removes those exits. That is why people who speak precisely often seem more powerful than they physically are. Their language gives nothing loose to grab. There is no fog, no easy opening for misdirection, no flood to tune out. Just structure, just signal, just force. Feel the discipline inside that. You cannot be precise if you are still addicted to being liked. You cannot be precise if you fear your own directness. You cannot be precise if your words still work for your moods. Precision requires loyalty to truth over comfort. Sometimes that truth is about others. Sometimes it is about yourself. In fact, the hardest precision is usually internal. Naming your own pattern without excuse. Naming your own fear without theater. Naming your own limit without shame. Once you can do that, your outer language sharpens too. You no longer need clutter because your inner world is less cluttered. You no longer need 10 versions of the same point because you actually know what it is. That is why verbal precision is not just a communication skill. It is evidence of an ordered mind, and an ordered mind changes identity. The person you are becoming is no longer impressed by constant speech, no longer seduced by emotional overflow, no longer flattered by being heard if what is heard is weak. You are learning a harsher standard. If the words do not carry weight, they do not leave your mouth. That standard changes how people see you. More importantly, it changes how you see yourself. Because once you have tasted the strength of measured speech, noise starts to feel ugly. Waste starts to feel expensive. Explaining starts to feel heavy. Overpromising starts to feel dishonest. You begin to prefer the clean line, the direct answer, the controlled pause. And that preference is not just a habit now. It is becoming part of your identity, which means the final shift is close, because eventually saying less is no longer something you try to do. It becomes the natural language of a person who has learned what real power sounds like. Chapter 9. Becoming a person of weight. At some point, discipline stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like character. That is when the shift becomes real. You no longer talk less because you are trying to follow a rule. You talk less because waste offends you. Careless speech feels sloppy. Endless explanation feels cheap. Emotional overflow feels unclean. You begin to sense that every unnecessary sentence weakens the architecture of the self you are building. This matters because identity is not made from big declarations. It is made from repeated standards. If you repeatedly allow your mouth to serve impulse, your identity becomes porous. If you repeatedly require your mouth to serve truth, your identity becomes dense. Dense people carry weight. They do not need larger personalities. They do not need louder language. Their presence comes from consistency. You learn that when they speak, they mean it. When they promise, they follow. When they refuse, the refusal holds. When they apologize, it is real. When they go quiet, the silence means something. That is weight. Stop for a second. Ask yourself honestly, do your words currently make you seem heavier or lighter? This is where most people stop. They want the appearance of weight without the private standards that create it. They want to sound decisive without becoming decisive. They want to appear calm without mastering reactivity. They want concise speech without the uncomfortable discipline of thinking clearly first. It does not work that way. Weight is earned in silence before it is heard in speech. It is earned when you keep a promise to yourself that nobody else saw. It is earned when you refuse to send the message that would only expose hunger. It is earned when you leave a point standing instead of decorating it for approval. It is earned when you sit with misunderstanding and do not collapse. It is earned when your mouth stops trying to rescue every insecure part of you. These moments are invisible to others at first, but they shape the voice they eventually hear. The truth is, people can feel whether your speech comes from settled ground. They may not say it that way, but they feel it. They feel the difference between someone speaking from appetite and someone speaking from a standard. Appetite wants effect now. Standard wants alignment first. Appetite reaches, standard choices, and choice sounds heavier. This is not about becoming robotic. It is about becoming reliable in yourself. A person of weight does not speak to keep identity alive in public. Identity is already alive. Speech simply reveals it. That is why such a person can afford brevity. The words do not need to do all the labor. The life behind the words carries most of the force. That is a brutal truth many people avoid. They want stronger speech without stronger living. But words gain meaning from congruence. If you always speak about discipline and live in impulse, your words go hollow. If you speak little but act clearly, your words grow heavier over time. Life is what gives language its mass. This is where most people stop. They work on delivery and ignore congruence. They practice tone. They memorize lines. They try to look composed. But rooms can eventually detect the gap between language and life. Not immediately, eventually. And when that gap becomes clear, even good phrasing loses trust. So becoming a person of weight requires more than verbal technique. It requires internal law. You decide that your word matters, even when nobody is checking. You decide that a sentence will not leave your mouth if you do not intend to honor it. You decide that language is not for self-inflation. It is for truth, direction, boundary, repair, and commitment. That decision hardens character. The truth is, the people who leave the deepest mark on others are often not the most expressive. They are the most aligned. Their words and actions know each other. That unity creates gravity. People relax around it because they do not have to decode endless noise. They know where things stand. Even when the truth is difficult, clarity is a form of mercy. That is another kind of weight. Clean impact. Think of the opposite. How much pain in your life came from weak words, vague words, casual words that should never have been casual. A person of weight does not play loosely with speech because speech shapes reality. It shapes trust, it shapes expectation, it shapes endings, it shapes memory. Once you understand that, your entire relationship to language changes. You stop admiring people who always have something to say. You start admiring people whose speech is accountable. Accountable speech is mature speech. It does not promise to soothe every wound. It does not bend to every mood, does not chase every audience. It stands, and the more it stands, the more you stand with it. This is how identity deepens, not through dramatic reinvention, through 1,000 small refusals to speak beneath your standard, through 1,000 small choices to let silence do its work, through 1,000 moments where truth mattered more than discharge. Eventually, the old version of you starts feeling unfamiliar. The person who rushed to explain, the person who spoke to relieve pressure, the person who reached for effect through volume. That person starts fading. In his place is someone more contained, more direct, more difficult to shake, and more careful with the sacred thing that leaves his mouth. That change does not end in technique, it ends in a different way of being, a different relationship to truth itself, because when words are no longer wasted, they begin to serve their highest purpose. They stop being shelter, performance, and escape. They become an expression of reality without fear. Chapter 10. Let truth stand alone. In the end, this is not really about speaking less. It is about no longer needing language to save you. That is the deepest freedom. When you stop using words to beg for understanding, to manage perception, to feed ego, to release every impulse, to hide from direct truth, something inside you becomes simpler, stronger, quieter. You begin to trust that reality does not need your constant editing. You begin to trust that a true sentence can stand on its own. You begin to trust that silence is not emptiness. It is often the place where truth becomes visible. That is a different life. You walk into conversations with less hunger. You leave them with less residue. You stop replaying every exchange because you already know your words were chosen. You stop bleeding energy through explanation because you no longer need every mind to become your mirror. You stop fearing pauses because pauses are no longer threats to your identity. You become more solid. Stop for a second. Feel the possibility of that. A life where your mouth no longer weakens your mind. This is where most people stop. They make speech smaller, but never make truth cleaner. They become brief without becoming honest. They become controlled without becoming real. That is not the standard. The standard is harder. Say less, yes, but let what remains be true enough to stand without support. Truth that needs endless scaffolding is often not truth. It is argument. Real truth may still require context, but it carries a different feeling. It is simpler. It is cleaner. It does not hustle. It does not chase acceptance. It does not tremble in the face of silence. It arrives, it stands, and if the room resists it, it remains what it is. That is power. The truth is, this kind of speech changes more than communication. It changes destiny because it changes decisions. When your language becomes disciplined, your thoughts become clearer. When your thoughts become clearer, your choices become cleaner. When your choices become cleaner, your life stops filling with avoidable chaos. You waste less time repairing what your mouth created. You stop opening doors you never wanted open. You stop promising from emotion. You stop confessing from loneliness. You stop arguing from pride. Life gets quieter, and quiet is where strength can be heard. This is not a small reward. This is a different internal climate. You start noticing that the strongest moments are often the least dramatic. A firm no, a brief truth, a held silence, a boundary spoken once, an apology without performance, a refusal to explain past the point, a choice to let action speak where words once begged. These moments do not look grand from the outside, but they reorganize the soul, because every time you let truth stand alone, you prove to yourself that you can live without the old crutches, without the flood, without the chase, without the need to soften every edge or decorate every fact. You prove that your voice can serve reality instead of your fear. This is where most people stop. They still think power sounds loud, but loudness is often insecurity amplified. Real power sounds measured. It sounds exact. It sounds like a person who could say more and chooses not to. It sounds like control. It sounds like silence holding the line until truth arrives. And when truth arrives from that place, people feel it. Not because it was dramatic, because it was earned. The truth is, every word you speak should come through 3 gates. Is it true? Is it necessary? Does it carry weight? If not, let it die. Let silence keep it. Not every thought deserves daylight. Not every feeling deserves language. Not every audience deserves your interior. That is not coldness. That is stewardship. Your voice is not cheap. Your speech is not casual. Your word is part of your character. Treat it that way. Take this seriously. The mouth can build a life or slowly betray it. From this point on, you will notice more. You will hear the leak in other people. You will hear it in yourself before it escapes. You will feel the old impulse to overshare, over-explain, over-promise, overreact. Good. That means awareness is awake. Now the standard must stay awake too. Say the clean thing. Say the necessary thing. Say the true thing. Then stop. Let the sentence land. Let the silence work. Let people meet the weight of what was said without rescuing them from it. And when there is nothing worth saying, let your restraint speak for you, because in the end, the strongest people are not remembered for how much they said. They are remembered for the few words that could not be ignored. Silence is not the absence of power. It is the place where power gathers. A weak mouth spends truth to relieve pressure. A disciplined mouth keeps truth sharp. Not every thought deserves a voice. Not every feeling deserves a sentence. When your words become rare, your meaning becomes heavy. Say only what can stand after you stop speaking.